Sometimes life gives you a moment where everything changes, and you have to decide what kind of person you really are. Jonas Blackwood rode into town that morning to buy horses, but he left with something far more precious: a woman's freedom. She sat on that fence rail like discarded property, eyes hollow but spirit unbroken, while townsfolk haggled over her like cattle. This mountain man had spent 20 years alone in the high country, needing nothing from anyone. But something in her quiet defiance called to him. He paid the price and rode out with her, knowing full well the hard road ahead. What made a solitary man risk everything for a stranger? Before we begin, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. To understand what happened that day in Bitter Creek, you need to know who Jonas Blackwood was before he rode down from the mountains. For 20 years, he'd lived in the high country of Montana Territory, where the peaks scraped the belly of heaven and the valleys held secrets older than memory itself. His cabin sat at 8,000 feet, nestled in a grove of ancient pines that whispered stories when the wind moved through them just right. Jonas was 45 years old, though the mountains had a way of making a man look both younger and older at the same time. Younger in the eyes, perhaps, where the clean air and honest work kept a certain clarity. Older in the hands and face, where weather and solitude carved their marks deep. He stood just over 6 feet, lean and strong in the way of men who carry their own weight and no one else's. His hair, once dark as a raven's wing, had gone silver at the temples. His beard, which he kept trimmed close in warmer months and let grow wild come winter, showed more gray than brown these days. He'd come to the mountains in 1853, a young man of 25 carrying wounds that had nothing to do with flesh and bone. Before that, there'd been a war, the Mexican War, where he'd served as a scout for the army. He'd been good at it, moving through the hostile territory like smoke, reading the land the way other men read books. But war has a price, and Jonas had paid it in full. He'd seen things no man should see, done things that haunted his sleep even now. After the war, he'd tried to go home to Missouri. There was a girl waiting, or so he thought. Mary Ellen Preston, with hair the color of honey and a laugh that could chase away the darkest thoughts. They'd married in the spring of 1852, and for one golden year, Jonas had believed he could be a normal man living a normal life. They'd bought a small farm outside of Independence, planted crops, talked about children. Then the cholera came. It swept through the Missouri River Valley like the angel of death, and it took Mary Ellen in 3 days. Jonas held her hand as the life drained out of her, watched the light fade from those kind eyes, and something in him broke that never quite healed. He buried her under an oak tree on the farm, sold everything he owned, and pointed his horse toward the setting sun. The mountains had saved him in their way. They asked nothing of him except respect and attention. They didn't judge. They didn't take without giving back. A man could lose himself in all that stone and timber and sky, could become small enough that the pain became small too. Not gone, never gone, but manageable, bearable. Jonas's life had fallen into a rhythm over those 20 years. Spring meant trapping beaver and marten in the high streams, their pelts thick and valuable. Summer was for hunting, for smoking meat and drying herbs, for gathering what the land offered freely. Fall meant preparation. Firewood stacked high, root cellar filled, last repairs made before the snows came. Winter was for surviving, for long nights by the fire with books he'd read a dozen times, for the peculiar peace that comes from being utterly alone. He made 2 trips to civilization each year, once in early summer to sell his winter furs and pelts, and once in late fall to buy supplies for the coming winter and to replace whatever tools or equipment had worn out. He was known in the scattered settlements and trading posts of the territory. Jonas Blackwood, the mountain man. Fair in his dealings, honest to a fault, kept to himself but would help a neighbor in genuine need. He had friends, if you could call them that, other men who'd chosen similar lives, with whom he might share a meal or a bottle of whiskey when their paths crossed, but no one close. No one who might work their way past the walls he'd built. His cabin reflected the man. Solid, simple, sufficient. One large room with a stone hearth he'd built himself. Rock by careful rock. A sleeping loft above, reached by a ladder of pine. Shelves lined with books, most of them salvaged or traded for over the years. A heavy oak table where he took his meals and worked on equipment. Windows that faced east and south, letting in the morning light. Outside stood a smaller cabin that served as his workshop, a smokehouse, a root cellar dug deep into the hillside. Everything a man needed to live, nothing more. His possessions fit in a worn leather saddlebag when he traveled. Extra clothes, simple and practical. A whetstone for his knives, ammunition for his rifle, a small sewing kit, a battered tin cup that had been his father's. The few things that mattered to him weren't things at all. The view from his porch at sunrise, the taste of cold stream water, the satisfaction of work done well, the silence that wasn't really silence but rather a symphony of wind and water and wild things. But lately, in the past year or so, something had shifted. Jonas would sit on his porch in the evenings, watching the light fade from the peaks, and feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Loneliness. Not the clean solitude he'd sought, but a hollow ache that no amount of mountain grandeur could fill. He was getting older. The winters seemed harder, the work more tiring, and sometimes in the space between sleep and waking, he'd reach across the bed and find it empty, and the old grief would rise up fresh as morning dew. He'd pushed those feelings down, of course, told himself he was being foolish. He'd made his choice 20 years ago, and it had been the right choice for the man he'd been then. The man he still was, he'd thought. That autumn of 1873, he'd ridden down from the mountains with a specific purpose. His 2-pack horses were getting old, struggling with the steep trails and heavy loads. He needed younger animals, strong and sure-footed, to see him through the coming years. There was a stockyard in Bitter Creek, a dusty settlement 3 days' ride from his cabin, where a trader named Silas Kern kept good horses at fair prices. Jonas had brought coin, silver dollars earned from his summer furs, enough to buy a matched pair with money left over for winter supplies. The journey down had been pleasant enough. The aspens were turning gold, the air carried the first hint of coming cold, and the trail was clear. He'd camped under the stars, made simple meals over small fires, and allowed himself to look forward to the task ahead. Choosing horses was satisfying work, assessing their legs and teeth and temperament, imagining how they'd handle the mountain trails. He'd ridden into Bitter Creek on a Tuesday morning, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The town was like 100 others scattered across the territories, a wide main street churned to mud by wagon wheels and horses' hooves. False-fronted buildings promising goods and services they could barely deliver, and people trying to scratch out lives in country that didn't much care whether they succeeded or failed. Jonas had expected to conduct his business and be gone by nightfall. Buy the horses, load up on flour and coffee and other necessities. Maybe have one decent meal at the boarding house before heading back to the high country. Simple, straightforward, the kind of transaction he'd made a dozen times before. He had no idea that everything was about to change, that in a few hours he'd make a decision that would alter the course of his life in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. That the walls he'd so carefully built around his heart were about to come tumbling down because of a woman sitting on a fence. Sometimes the most important moments of our lives arrive quietly, without warning or fanfare. This was one of those moments, though Jonas didn't know it yet as he dismounted in front of the stockyard, secured his horse to the hitching rail, and walked toward the corral where Silas Kern kept his animals. The morning sun was warm on his shoulders. The air smelled of dust and horses and autumn. and his life as a solitary mountain man had less than an hour left to run. The stockyard was busy for a Tuesday morning. Jonas counted maybe 15 people milling about, townsmen in dusty suits, a few ranch hands checking over cattle in the far pen, and Silas Kern himself, a portly man with a handlebar mustache that seemed to have a life of its own. Silas spotted Jonas and raised a hand in greeting. "Blackwood, been expecting you. Got just what you need. 2 mares, 4 years old, sound as a dollar. Come take a look." Jonas started toward the main corral, but something caught his eye. Movement at the edge of his vision, over by the loading fence. He turned his head and stopped walking. A woman sat on the top rail of a weathered fence, her feet dangling maybe 4 feet off the ground. She wore a dress that might have been blue once, but had faded to the color of a winter sky, patched and repatched with whatever fabric had been available. Her hair was brown, pulled back in a simple braid that hung down her back. From this distance, Jonas couldn't make out her features clearly, but something in the way she held herself, straight-backed despite everything, made him pause. There were men around her, 5 or 6 of them, talking and gesturing. One of them, a tall man in a black vest, seemed to be conducting some kind of business. Another man, shorter and thick around the middle, was examining the woman the way Jonas had planned to examine horses, looking at her teeth, checking her hands, asking her to stand and turn. Jonas felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Silas," he called out, not taking his eyes off the scene. "What's going on over there?" The horse trader came up beside him, followed Jonas's gaze, and made a disgusted sound in his throat. That's Kate Morrison, widow woman. Her husband died 3 months back, left her with debts she can't pay. Town council decided to auction her off, indenture her, they're calling it, though we all know what it really is. They're selling her." Jonas's voice was flat. "Her labor, technically. 7-year contract to whoever pays her husband's debts. Gambling debts, mostly. Man was a fool with cards." Silas spat into the dust. "I don't hold with it myself, but the creditors were pushing, and the council decided it was either this or throw her in jail for fraud. At least this way she's got a chance, or so they tell themselves." Jonas watched as the short man grabbed the woman's arm, making her stand on the fence rail so he could see her better. She complied without resistance, but Jonas could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was set. She was enduring this, not accepting it. "How much?" Jonas heard himself ask. Silas looked at him sharply. "How much for what?" "Her debts. How much to clear them?" "Blackwood, you can't be serious. You came here for horses, not—" "How much, Silas?" The trader scratched his chin, calculating. "Last I heard, about $300, maybe $350. That's more than those horses you wanted, and—" Jonas was already walking toward the fence. He heard Silas calling after him, but the words didn't register. His boots struck the hard-packed earth with purpose, each step bringing him closer to a decision he hadn't known he was going to make until the moment he'd made it. The tall man in the black vest looked up as Jonas approached. His name was Hiram Coates, and he fancied himself a gentleman despite being nothing more than a saloon owner with pretensions. "Help you, mountain man?" "I want to pay her debts." Jonas's voice was steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Coates raised an eyebrow. "That's so. You understand what you're buying. This is a 7-year indenture contract. She'd be bound to you, legally. You'd be responsible for her keep, her conduct." "I understand. How much?" $340. Plus the contract fee. Call it $350 even. Coates smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "That's a lot of money for a woman who can't cook worth a damn and has a mouth on her when she forgets her place." Jonas looked past Coates to the woman on the fence. For the first time, he saw her face clearly. She was maybe 28 or 30, with fine features that hardship had sharpened but not broken. Her eyes, gray as storm clouds, met his, and in them he saw something he recognized. Pride wrapped around pain, held together by sheer determination not to break. It was the same look he'd seen in his own mirror for 20 years. "I'll pay it," Jonas said. "Cash. Right now, but I want the contract papers destroyed. She goes free, no strings." That got everyone's attention. The short man stopped his examination. The other townsmen turned to stare. Even the woman, Kate, looked at Jonas with something like surprise breaking through her carefully maintained composure. "Free," Coates laughed, though it didn't reach his eyes. "That's not how this works, friend. You pay the debt, you get the contract. That's the law. Then the law needs changing." Jonas reached into his coat and pulled out a leather purse heavy with silver coins. $350. In exchange, you give me whatever papers there are. I tear them up, and she walks away clear. No debt, no contract, no strings. That's my offer. Coates looked at the purse, then at Jonas, then at Kate. Calculations ran behind his eyes. Profit versus principle, assuming he had any principles to begin with. "You some kind of reformer? Abolitionist?" "I'm a man who doesn't like seeing people sold like livestock. Are we doing business or not?" The saloon owner chewed on his mustache for a moment, then shrugged. "Your money's as good as anyone's, and frankly, this whole business has been more trouble than it's worth. Fine. Give me the money. I'll get the papers from the clerk's office." The transaction took less than 10 minutes. Jonas counted out the silver while Coates sent someone running for the debt papers and the proposed indenture contract. The other townsmen drifted away, some shaking, their heads at the foolishness of mountain men, others muttering about the impropriety of it all. The short man who'd been examining Kate looked genuinely disappointed, which made Jonas's hands curl into fists until he reminded himself that violence wouldn't help anyone. When Coates returned with the papers, a sheaf of documents covered in official-looking seals and signatures, Jonas took them without reading. He ripped them in half, then in half again, then walked to a nearby water trough and dropped the pieces in. They floated for a moment before the ink began to run, the words dissolving into meaningless smudges. "There," Jonas said, turning back to face Kate, who had climbed down from the fence and stood now on her own 2 feet, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're free. No debt, no obligation. You can go wherever you want." For a long moment, Kate said nothing. She just stared at him, those gray eyes searching his face for something. His real motive, perhaps, or some sign that this was a trick. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough, as if she hadn't used it much lately. Why? It was a fair question, and Jonas wished he had a better answer. "Because it was wrong," he said simply. "What they were doing to you, it was wrong, and I had the means to stop it, so I did. You don't know me. I could be anyone. I could be trouble. Maybe. But that's your choice to make, not theirs." He gestured vaguely toward Coates and the departing townsmen. "You're your own person now, free to make your own mistakes if you want to." Kate wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture that spoke of vulnerability she didn't want to show. "I have nowhere to go, no family, no prospects. Winter's coming, and I've got nothing but this dress and 40 cents in my pocket." Jonas hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd acted on impulse, something he hadn't done in 20 years, and now the consequences were settling on him like snow. He couldn't just leave her here. Bitter Creek had made its opinion clear. She was a problem to be disposed of, and if he left her, they'd find another way to dispose of her. "I live up in the mountains," he said slowly, working through the implications even as he spoke. 3 days' ride north. It's remote, but there's a second cabin on my property. Needs some fixing up, but it's sound. You could stay there, at least through the winter. By spring, maybe you'd have figured out where you want to go, what you want to do. Why would you do that? She was still suspicious, still waiting for the real price to reveal itself. Because it's the right thing to do. Jonas met her eyes steadily, letting her see the truth of it. "I'm not asking anything from you, Kate. No obligations, no expectations. Just a place to stay until you get back on your feet. After that, you're free to leave whenever you want. She studied him for what felt like a long time. Around them, the stockyard had returned to its business. Silas was showing someone his horses. A ranch hand was loading feed sacks onto a wagon. Life went on, indifferent to the small drama that had just played out. Finally, Kate nodded. Just once, a small dip of her chin. All right, through the winter, but I'll earn my keep. I can work, cooking, cleaning, mending, whatever needs doing. If you want to, that's fine, but it's not required. It's required by me. There was steel in her voice now, pride reasserting itself. I won't be beholden, even to kindness. Jonas almost smiled. He understood that need, that fierce independence. It was what had driven him to the mountains in the first place. Fair enough. I need to buy some supplies for the trip. We can leave first thing tomorrow morning. I'm ready now. You have things to gather, people to say goodbye to? Kate looked around at Bitter Creek, at the town that had been willing to sell her to the highest bidder, and her expression was answer enough. No, I have nothing here. If you're ready to go, so am I. Jonas thought about the horses he'd come to buy, still standing in Silas's corral. He thought about his carefully planned supply run, his intention to be back in the mountains by the end of the week. He thought about his solitary life, the walls he'd built, the peace he'd found in isolation. Then he looked at Kate Morrison, standing straight and proud despite everything, and realized that maybe peace wasn't the only thing worth having. All right then, he said, let's go home. They crested the final ridge just as twilight settled over the mountains. Jonas reined in his horse and gestured ahead, letting Kate take in the view. Below them, nestled in a natural bowl between three peaks, sat his property. 2 log cabins separated by a clearing, smoke rising from what Jonas knew was a banked fire in his hearth, and beyond them the endless sweep of forest climbing toward the snow line. There, he said quietly. Home. Kate sat motionless on her horse, absorbing the scene. The main cabin was solid and well built, with a stone chimney rising from one end and a covered porch across the front. The second cabin was smaller, set back among the pines, and even from this distance Jonas could see it needed work. One shutter hung crooked, and there were gaps in the chinking between the logs. The smaller one is yours, Jonas said. Like I mentioned, it needs repair, but the roof is sound and the hearth draws well. We'll get it fixed up proper. It's more than I expected, Kate said softly. More than I hoped for. They descended the trail as darkness gathered, arriving at the main cabin just as the first stars appeared. Jonas dismounted and helped Kate down. She'd grown stiff from the long day's ride, then tended to the horses while she stood in the clearing, slowly turning to take everything in. Come inside, Jonas said when the horses were settled. I'll get the fire built up and make us some supper. You can look at your cabin in the morning when there's light to see by. The main cabin's interior was simple but comfortable. The stone hearth dominated one wall, already throwing heat from the fire Jonas quickly built up. Shelves lined another wall, packed with books and supplies. A heavy oak table sat in the center of the room, scarred from years of use but solid. Above, a sleeping loft was visible, accessed by a sturdy ladder. Everything was neat, organized, the home of a man who lived alone and liked things in their place. Kate stood in the doorway, taking it in. You built all this yourself? Most of it. Had help with the heavy timber work from a neighbor 10 miles south, man named Dutch Kiefer. Good fellow, keeps to himself like I do. Jonas hung his coat on a peg and moved to the shelves. Sit down, you must be exhausted. She was, though she tried not to show it. Kate sank into one of the chairs at the table, and Jonas could see the weariness in every line of her body. 3 days of hard riding after months of stress and deprivation. It was a wonder she'd made it this far without complaint. He prepared a simple meal, more elaborate than trail food but still basic: venison stew from his stores, biscuits baked in a Dutch oven, coffee strong and dark. As he worked, Kate watched from the table, her expression thoughtful. "You know your way around a kitchen," she observed. "Man lives alone long enough. He learns to cook or starves. It's not fancy, but it's edible. It smells wonderful." They ate in companionable quiet, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and the distant promise of weather. Jonas noted it automatically. Storm coming, probably tomorrow. They'd need to move fast on the cabin repairs if Kate was going to be comfortable. After supper, Jonas laid out his plan. "Tomorrow we'll assess what needs doing on your cabin. New chinking, definitely. That shutter needs fixing. Probably want to check the floorboards and make sure there's no rot. I've got supplies stored, so we should have everything we need." "I'll help," Kate said immediately. "I was counting on it. You'll be living there. You should have a say in how it's set up." Jonas poured them both more coffee. "There's a root cellar out back that we share. My stores are well stocked, so we've got plenty to get through winter. Come spring, we can plant a bigger garden, put up more preserves." Kate wrapped her hands around her cup, absorbing the casual "we" in his planning. "You've thought this through?" "Not really. Making it up as I go." Jonas smiled slightly. "But I've been through enough winters up here to know what's needed. You'll learn quick enough." Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Mornings began early, with Jonas building up the fire and Kate preparing breakfast from his stores. She'd insisted on taking over the cooking duties. "Let me contribute something," she'd said, and he'd agreed, understanding her need to feel useful. After breakfast, they'd work on the smaller cabin, Jonas teaching Kate the basics of log home maintenance as they went. She was a quick learner, with good hands and better instincts. When Jonas showed her how to mix the chinking compound, mud and moss and horsehair, work together until it was the right consistency, she mastered it in one try. When he demonstrated how to check logs for soundness, she started finding weak spots he'd missed. By the third day, they were working side by side as equals, her learning curve steep and sure. "You're good at this," Jonas said, watching her work fresh chinking into a gap. "I like working with my hands. Feels honest." Kate smoothed the compound, making sure it was flush with the logs. "My father was a stonemason. Used to take me to job sites when I was young. I'd watch him work for hours, the way he could make stone and mortar into something strong, something lasting." "What happened to him?" "Accident on a job. I was 14. Her hands kept working, not pausing in their rhythm. "After that, my mother and I managed as best we could. She took in sewing, I helped. We got by. Then she got sick, and I met James, and he seemed like security, seemed like a way forward." She laughed bitterly. "Shows what I knew." Jonas understood the impulse, choosing safety over happiness, practicality over passion. It was how most people survived in this hard country. "You were young. We all make choices based on what we think we need at the time. Do we get to remake those choices? Start over?" "I think that's what you're doing now." Kate looked up at him then, really looked, and Jonas saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of it. Trust, earned slowly over days of honest work and honest conversation. That evening, as they shared supper in the main cabin, Kate's cabin still not quite ready for habitation, Jonas brought out his father's brass compass. It was an old thing, worn smooth by years of handling, the needle still true despite its age. "This was my father's," he said, placing it on the table between them. "He gave it to me before I left for the war." said a man needed to know which direction he was heading, especially when the world got confused. Kate picked it up carefully, feeling its weight. It's beautiful. It kept me alive more than once. Not just the compass itself, but what it represented. The idea that no matter how lost you get, there's always a way to orient yourself, to find true north. Jonas paused, choosing his words. I think you lost your way for a while, Kate. We both did. But that doesn't mean we can't find it again. She turned the compass in her hands, watching the needle swing and settle. What's your true north now, Jonas? It was a fair question, and he didn't have a simple answer. I used to think it was solitude, peace and quiet and mountains, but lately I'm thinking maybe that's not enough. Maybe true north is something more than just survival. Like what? Like purpose. Like connection. Like building something that matters. He gestured vaguely at the cabin, at the work they'd been doing together. Like this. Kate set the compass down gently, reverently. Thank you for showing me this, for trusting me with it. You've earned trust, Kate. These past few days, watching you work, seeing how you tackle problems and don't quit even when things are hard. That tells me who you are, and who you are is someone worth knowing. She looked away, but not before Jonas saw the shine of tears in her eyes. I'm not used to people saying things like that. Then you've been around the wrong people. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling, the compass resting between them like a promise of direction found. Outside, Jonas heard the first whisper of wind that meant the weather was changing. Tomorrow would bring challenges, the storm he'd sensed coming, more work on the cabin, the daily tasks of mountain life. But tonight, sitting across from Kate Morrison in the firelight, sharing stories and silence, Jonas felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. He felt less alone, and more than that, he felt like maybe, just maybe, being less alone was exactly what he'd been needing all along. The storm arrived with the dawn, not violent but persistent, the kind of early snow that settles in and means to stay a while. Jonas woke to find 3 inches already on the ground, and more falling steadily from a grey sky. He descended from the loft quietly, not wanting to wake Kate, who'd fallen asleep in the chair by the fire the night before. He'd covered her with a blanket and let her rest, knowing she needed it more than she'd admit. She stirred as he built up the fire, her eyes opening slowly. For just a moment, she looked confused about where she was, then memory settled and her expression cleared. Morning, Jonas said softly. Coffee's on. Kate sat up, stretching the stiffness from her shoulders. It's snowing. First real snow of the season. Probably won't stick long, but it's a reminder that winter's coming fast. We'll need to push hard on getting your cabin finished. Over the next week, they worked with focused determination. The snow melted, then came again, heavier. Between storms, they chinked and patched, replaced boards and fixed the shutter. Jonas showed Kate how to check the chimney for blockages, how to test the floorboards for rot, how to stack firewood so it would stay dry and cure properly. She absorbed everything, her competence growing daily. He also taught her mountain survival, how to read the weather in the clouds and the wind, how to track game in the snow, how to use a rifle with accuracy. Kate proved a natural shot, her hand steady and her eye clear. The first time she brought down a rabbit at 50 yards, Jonas let out a low whistle of appreciation. You sure you haven't done this before? I'm sure, but my father taught me to focus, to take my time with things. Guess it applies to shooting too. She held the rifle comfortably now, not like a foreign object, but like a tool she understood. Though I have to admit, I don't much like killing things. Nobody should like it, but up here, it's necessary. The mountain provides, but you have to be willing to take what it offers. Jonas moved to help her field dress the rabbit. Life and death are close neighbors in this country. That's something you learn quick. As they worked side by side, Their conversations deepened. Kate began to share more of her past. Not just the broad strokes, but the details that paint a real picture of a life lived. Her childhood in a small Pennsylvania town, her mother's gentle nature, her father's quiet strength, the years after his death, struggling to get by, meeting James at a church social, thinking he was charming and stable, not seeing the weakness underneath until it was too late. Jonas shared too, more than he'd shared with anyone in 2 decades. Stories from the war, not the violence, but the camaraderie, the men he'd served with, the strange beauty he'd found even in dark times. His courtship of Mary Ellen, brief and intense. Their year of marriage, golden and fleeting. The aftermath, the long darkness, the decision to leave everything behind. "Do you regret it?" Kate asked one evening as they finished supper. "Coming to the mountains, living alone all these years?" Jonas considered the question seriously. "No, I needed this place, this life. It saved me when nothing else could. But I won't pretend there haven't been costs. A man can get so used to solitude that he forgets how to be with people, forgets what it feels like to share a meal, a conversation, a life." "Are you forgetting? Now, I mean." He looked at her across the table, at this woman who'd come into his life so unexpectedly and fit so naturally into it. "No, I'm remembering." A moment passed between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Kate looked away, breaking the spell, and Jonas let her. There was time. They had all winter, and some things couldn't be rushed. One afternoon in the second week, as they stood back to admire the nearly finished cabin, Jonas noticed movement in the tree line. 3 men on horses, approaching from the south trail. He felt Kate tense beside him. "Stay close," he said quietly, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the cabin wall. The men reined in at the edge of the clearing, and Jonas recognized trouble when he saw it. They had the look of men who had spent time on the wrong side of the law, hard eyes, harder expressions, and an air of casual menace that came from being used to taking what they wanted. The leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, spoke first. "This Blackwood's property?" "It is. I'm Blackwood. What's your business?" "Heard you got quite a spread up here. Nice location, good water, plenty of timber." The man looked around appraisingly, his gaze lingering on Kate. "Some folks down south are saying this land's open for claiming, that you don't have proper papers." Jonas felt a cold anger settle in his gut. It was an old game, squatters trying to intimidate legitimate owners, hoping to drive them off and take their property. He'd dealt with it before, but never when he had someone else to protect. "My papers are in order, filed with the territorial office in Helena. This land is legally mine, and you're trespassing." "That's so?" The scarred man smiled, showing broken teeth. "Well, maybe we'll just camp nearby for a while. See how things shake out. Free country, after all." "Free country ends at my property line. You're not welcome here." The 3 men exchanged glances, and Jonas saw calculation in their eyes. 3 against 1 weren't bad odds from their perspective, especially if they thought he was just an aging mountain man with no backup. They didn't know about his military background, didn't know what he was capable of when pushed. Kate stepped forward slightly, positioning herself beside Jonas in a gesture of solidarity. The movement drew the scarred man's attention, and his smile widened. "That your woman?" "She's under my protection," Jonas said evenly. "And you'd best remember that before you say anything else, you'll regret." The tension stretched tight, the air heavy with potential violence. Then the scarred man laughed and pulled his horse around. "Like I said, just passing through. Might set up camp a few miles south. Do some hunting. Hope that's not a problem. As long as you're off my property, you can do what you want." The 3 men rode off, but not before the scarred man looked back once more, his expression making clear this wasn't over. Jonas watched until they disappeared into the trees, then turned to Kate. "Go inside. Get your rifle and make sure it's loaded." "Jonas, what's happening?" "Claim jumpers, probably. Or worse. Men like that don't show up by accident, and they don't leave just because you ask politely." He checked his own rifle, his movements calm and practiced. "They'll be back, most likely. When they do, we need to be ready." Kate's face had gone pale, but her voice was steady. "What do we do?" "We prepare, and we stand our ground." Jonas looked at her seriously. "This is my land, Kate, but you're part of it now. If you're going to stay, you need to be willing to defend it. Can you do that?" She met his eyes, and he saw the fear there, but also something stronger. Determination, resolve, the same quiet defiance he'd seen on that fence in Bitter Creek. "Yes, I can do that." "Good. Then let's get to work." The men returned 3 days later, but not alone. They brought a sheriff with them, or at least a man wearing a sheriff's badge. Jonas recognized the type, frontier law enforcement that bent with the prevailing wind, more sûr, interested in profit than justice. The badge was real enough, but the man wearing it was corrupt through and through. Jonas and Kate stood on the porch as the 4 men rode into the clearing. He'd positioned them carefully. High ground, clear fields of fire, his rifle within easy reach but not openly displayed. Kate stood beside him, her own rifle just inside the doorway. They'd spent the past 3 days preparing, practicing, making sure they were ready for whatever came. The sheriff was a portly man in his 50s with a florid face and shrewd eyes. He dismounted with a wheeze and approached the porch, the 3 others hanging back but watching intently. "Jonas Blackwood." "That's right. I'm Sheriff Cyrus Gant out of Deer Lodge. Got some questions for you and that woman there." He gestured toward Kate with a folder he carried. "What kind of questions?" Gant opened the folder with theatrical precision, pulling out a sheet of paper. Jonas's stomach dropped as he recognized what it was. A wanted poster, yellowed and worn, but still legible. And Kate's face was on it, rendered in rough ink, but unmistakable. "Catherine Morrison, also known as Kate Morrison," Gant read aloud. "Wanted for questioning in connection with the robbery and murder of 3 men in Butte, Montana territory. Also suspected of possessing knowledge regarding the whereabouts of $10,000 in gold stolen from a private mining concern." Kate had gone rigid beside Jonas, her face draining of color. "That's not true," she whispered. "I didn't kill anyone. I don't know anything about stolen gold." Gant smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "That's what they all say, miss. But I got a legal document here, signed and sealed, saying you're wanted for questioning. Now, you can come peaceful, or we can make this difficult. Your choice." Jonas felt the world tilt. He looked at Kate, saw the shock and fear in her eyes, and realized she'd been as blindsided by this as he was. She genuinely didn't know about any murders or stolen gold, which meant someone was setting her up, using her for something she didn't understand. "May I see that?" Jonas asked, keeping his voice calm. Gant handed over the wanted poster. Jonas studied it carefully, noting the date. It had been issued 2 weeks before Kate's husband died. The charges were serious: conspiracy to commit robbery, accessory to murder, possession of stolen property, and at the bottom, a substantial reward, $500 for information leading to her arrest and the recovery of the gold. "This doesn't make sense," Jonas said. "Her husband died 3 months ago. If she was wanted for these crimes, why wasn't she arrested then? Why wait until now? These things take time. Reports have to be filed, warrants issued. That's just how the law works, mountain man." Gant held out his hand for the poster. "Now, Miss Morrison comes with me, or we have a problem." Jonas looked at the 3 men who'd come with Gant. The scarred man was smiling openly now, enjoying the show, and suddenly Things clicked into place. This wasn't about justice. This was about the gold. These men thought Kate knew where it was, and they were using the law as a tool to get to her. "Give us a moment," Jonas said. "Private conversation." Gant's eyes narrowed. "You got 1 minute, and don't try anything stupid. We outnumber you, and I'm the law here." Jonas guided Kate inside, closing the door behind them. She was shaking, her breath coming fast and shallow. "Jonas, I swear I don't know anything about this. James never told me about any gold, any murders. I thought he was just a gambler with bad luck, not a—" "I believe you." Jonas gripped her shoulders, making her focus on him. "Kate, listen to me. They don't care about the truth. They want that gold, and they think you can lead them to it. If you go with them, they'll make you talk, and when they realize you can't tell them what they want to know—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Kate understood the implication. Men like that wouldn't just let her go. She was a loose end, and loose ends got tied up permanently. "What do I do?" Her voice was small, frightened, so different from the strong woman she'd been becoming. Jonas made a decision in that moment. He'd spent 20 years running from responsibility, from connection, from the possibility of loss. But looking at Kate, seeing her fear and trust warring in her gray eyes, he knew he couldn't run anymore. Wouldn't run anymore. "We stand our ground. Together. Jonas, they have the law on their side. If you fight them, you'll be— I don't care." And he meant it. "That badge doesn't make right out of wrong. You're innocent, and I'm not letting them take you." Kate searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Okay, what's the plan?" "We buy time. I'll tell them I need to see proof that this warrant is legitimate, that I want to contact the territorial marshal. That'll force them to either produce real documentation or show their hand." "And if they show their hand?" Jonas's expression hardened, military training rising to the surface. "Then we defend ourselves." They stepped back onto the porch together. Gant was checking his pocket watch with exaggerated patience. The 3 other men had spread out slightly, hands near their weapons. The setup of men planning violence. "Time's up, Blackwood. What's it going to be?" "I need to verify that warrant," Jonas said evenly. "Contact the territorial marshal. Make sure everything's legitimate. That's my right as a citizen." Gant's face darkened. "You questioning my authority?" "I'm questioning a piece of paper that's convenient enough to show up right after Kate settles here. Seems odd that she lived in Bitter Creek for months and nobody came looking for her until now." The scarred man spoke up from his position near the trees. "Maybe we weren't looking in Bitter Creek. Maybe we were looking for her here, knowing she'd run to her accomplice." Jonas felt Kate stiffen beside him. "Accomplice?" "Sure, James Morrison's partner, the man he was sending the gold to, the mountain man who was in on the whole thing from the start." The scarred man smiled. "That's you, Blackwood. Or did you think we wouldn't figure it out?" It was a lie, clumsy and obvious, but Jonas understood its purpose. They were trying to box him in, give him no choice but to let Kate go or be implicated himself. It was crude, but effective. "That's absurd," Jonas said. "I never met James Morrison, never even heard his name until Kate told me about him." "That's not what the evidence says." Gant pulled another paper from his folder, this one newer, with handwriting Jonas didn't recognize. "Got a letter here, written by Morrison before he died. Says he was working with a mountain man named Blackwood, that the gold was hidden somewhere on your property, and that his wife would come to collect it after things cooled down." Kate gasped. "That's a lie. James never mentioned Jonas. He couldn't have— I didn't even know Jonas existed until 2 weeks ago." "Then you're both either liars or fools," Gant said. "Either way, you're both coming with me. Miss Morrison on the murder charges, and you, Blackwood, on conspiracy to robbery." Jonas's hand moved slowly toward his rifle. "I don't think so." That's resisting arrest. That's a hanging offense in these parts. Gant's hand moved to his pistol. Last chance. Come peaceful, or we do this the hard way. Time seemed to slow down. Jonas assessed the situation with the cold clarity that had kept him alive during the war. 4 against 2, but he had the high ground, and Kate could shoot. The men were bunched too close together, poor tactical positioning, and most importantly, they'd underestimated him. But before anyone could draw, Kate spoke up, her voice suddenly strong and clear. "Wait, I know where the gold is." Everyone froze. Jonas looked at her in shock. "Kate!" "I know where it is," she repeated, meeting Gant's eyes. "Or at least I think I do. James left me something. A letter. I didn't understand what it meant until now, but it makes sense. He hid the gold, and he left me clues to find it." Gant leaned forward, greed naked on his face. "Where?" "Not so fast. You want the gold? Fine. But you let Jonas go. He's not part of this, never was. I'll take you to the gold, but only if you leave him alone." "Kate, no," Jonas started, but she cut him off. "It's my choice, Jonas. You gave me my freedom. Now I'm using it." She looked at him with those storm-gray eyes, and he saw resignation there, and sacrifice, and something that looked suspiciously like love. "Thank you. For everything. But this is my problem, not yours." Jonas wanted to argue, to refuse, to fight, but he also understood what she was doing. She was protecting him the only way she knew how, buying his safety with her own. It was brave and foolish and selfless, and it made his chest ache. Gant considered, then nodded. "All right, you take us to the gold, we let the mountain man be. Deal?" "Deal." "Kate." Jonas tried again, but she shook her head. "Go inside, Jonas. Please, let me handle this." And because he loved her, and in that moment he realized he did love her, completely and irrevocably, he stepped back. But his mind was already racing, calculating, planning. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Kate descended the porch steps, walking toward the waiting men with her head high. Jonas watched her go, watched her climb onto a horse behind one of the riders, watched the group turn and head south toward the deeper mountains. As soon as they were out of sight, Jonas went into action. He'd bought time, but not much. And if he was going to save Kate Morrison, he'd need to use every skill he'd learned in 20 years of solitude and 20 years before that of war. The hunt was on. Jonas moved with purpose the moment they were out of sight. 20 years of mountain living had taught him patience, but 20 years before that in the military had taught him when to act fast. This was a time for speed, for decisiveness, for using every advantage he possessed. First, he went to Kate's cabin, their cabin really, since they'd built it together, and searched through her few possessions. She'd mentioned a letter from James, something she hadn't understood until Gant showed up. Jonas needed to see it, needed to understand what they were really dealing with. He found it in the pocket of her old dress, the faded blue one she'd been wearing on the fence in Bitter Creek. The paper was thin, worn from handling, covered in cramped handwriting. Jonas carried it to the light and read, "Katie, if you're reading this, I'm dead. I know you'll hate me for what I'm about to tell you, but I need you to know the truth. The gambling wasn't bad luck. It was cover. I was working with some men, moving gold from a mine operation that wasn't entirely legal. Things went wrong. People died. I didn't pull the trigger, but I was there, and that makes me guilty enough. I took the gold and ran. Not because I'm brave, but because I'm a coward. I couldn't face what I'd become. I hid it where nobody would think to look, where even if they found it, they wouldn't recognize what it was. Katie, I'm sorry for the life I gave you. You deserved better. You always deserved better. If you need it, and God knows after my debts are paid, you'll need something. The gold is where the mountain man keeps his heart, where stone and timber meet, where the past sleeps under the present. I know that doesn't make sense now, but trust me. If you need to find it, you will. I loved you. I know I had a poor way of showing it, but I did. I hope someday you can forgive me. James. Jonas read it twice, his mind working through the cryptic clues. Where the mountain man keeps his heart, where stone and timber meet, where the past sleeps under the present. He'd assumed James meant some other mountain man, some accomplice Kate didn't know about. But what if... He stopped, a cold realization washing over him. The stone hearth in his cabin. Stone and timber meeting. He'd built that hearth 20 years ago when he first came to the mountains. And underneath it, before he'd laid the foundation stones, Jonas dropped the letter and ran to his cabin. He grabbed a pry bar from his workshop and attacked the hearth with controlled fury, wedging the bar between the stones, leveraging them up. The mortar was old, crumbling easily under sustained pressure. Within minutes, he'd exposed the base layer, the large foundation stones he'd set himself. And there, nestled in a hollow beneath the centermost stone, was a leather saddlebag. Old, worn, but intact. Jonas pulled it out, his hands shaking. Inside were smaller bags, heavy with weight. He opened one. Gold, nuggets and coins, gleaming dully in the firelight. Easily $10,000 worth, maybe more. Jonas sat back on his heels, understanding flooding through him. James Morrison had been here, to this cabin, probably while Jonas was out on a long hunting trip. He'd hidden the gold and crafted his cryptic clue, knowing Kate would never figure it out unless she had reason to, unless someone came looking for the gold and forced her hand. It was insurance, a final gift from a dying man to the wife he'd failed, but it was also a death sentence. Because now Jonas understood what Kate had done. She'd lied to buy him time, claiming she knew where the gold was when she really didn't. She was leading Gant and his men on a wild chase, probably heading south toward the deeper mountains, hoping to buy Jonas enough time to what? Run. Hide. Jonas almost laughed at the thought. He'd spent 20 years running from life, and he was done. Kate had stood up for him, sacrificed herself to protect him. The least he could do was return the favor. He pulled out the journal he kept, a leather-bound book where he documented his years in the mountains. On a blank page, he wrote quickly, "To whom it may concern, the gold hidden on my property was placed there without my knowledge by James Morrison. I discovered it today, October 14th, 1873. It belongs to the Rocky Mountain Mining Company of Butte and should be returned to them. Kate Morrison had no knowledge of this gold or its location. She is innocent of all charges. Signed, Jonas Blackwood." He left the journal open on the table, the gold beside it. If he didn't come back, at least there would be a record. Then he armed himself properly. Rifle, pistol, knife, ammunition. He changed into his old military clothes, the ones he'd kept stored in a trunk, barely touched in 20 years. They still fit, more or less. The man who wore them might be older, but he remembered how to fight. Dutch Kiefer, his neighbor 10 miles south, would know something. Dutch saw everything that happened in these mountains, kept track of comings and goings even if he didn't talk about them. Jonas saddled his horse and rode hard, reaching Dutch's cabin in under 2 hours. The old trapper was on his porch, smoking a pipe, unsurprised to see Jonas arrive at speed. "Figured you'd be coming. Saw some men heading up the South Ridge Trail about an hour ago. 4 men, 1 woman. Looked like trouble." "It is. They're trying to frame Kate for murder and robbery. She's leading them away from my place, buying me time." Dutch nodded slowly, processing this. "That the woman you brought up from Bitter Creek? The one they were going to sell?" "Yes." "She worth fighting for?" Jonas didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Then let's go get her." Dutch stood, moving with surprising speed for a man in his 60s. "I'll get my rifle." "Dutch, you don't have to—" "Boy, I've been watching you live like a ghost up here for 20 years. First time I've seen you care about something other than surviving. I'm not letting you face this alone." He disappeared into his cabin, emerging moments later with a rifle and a bandolier of ammunition. "Besides, I never liked corrupt sheriffs. Bad for the whole territory." They rode together, Dutch leading them along trails Jonas didn't know, shortcuts that shaved time off the journey. As they rode, Jonas explained everything: Kate's situation, the false charges, Gant's obvious corruption, the gold hidden in his hearth. "Smart woman," Dutch said. "Leading them south means she's taking them toward Widow's Canyon. Box Canyon, only one way in or out. If she can get them trapped there, they'll realize she doesn't know where the gold is. Then they'll kill her. Not if we get there first." They pushed the horses hard, arriving at the mouth of Widow's Canyon as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Jonas could see tracks in the soft ground. Multiple horses. Recent, they'd guessed right. "We need a plan," Dutch said, dismounting. "Can't just ride in shooting. They've got the high ground if they're smart." Jonas assessed the terrain with a tactical eye he hadn't used in decades. The canyon was narrow, maybe 100 yards wide, with steep walls on both sides. Good cover in the rocks and scrub, but limited movement. A natural trap, just like Dutch said. "I'll go in on foot," Jonas decided. "You stay here with the horses. Cover the entrance. If they try to run, you stop them. And if they don't run, if they dig in and fight, then I'll handle it." Jonas checked his rifle, his movements calm and practiced. "I was a military scout, Dutch. I know how to move unseen, how to take men by surprise. It's been a long time, but some things you don't forget." Dutch studied him for a moment, seeing something in Jonas he probably hadn't seen before. The soldier underneath the mountain man, the warrior that 20 years of peace couldn't quite erase. "All right, but you got 30 minutes. After that, I'm coming in whether you're ready or not." "Fair enough." Jonas moved into the canyon like smoke, silent and careful. The military training came back to him. How to place his feet, how to use cover, how to move with the landscape instead of against it. The canyon walls threw long shadows as the sun dropped lower, and he used them, staying in darkness, becoming part of the stone and scrub. He heard them before he saw them, voices raised in argument. As he crept closer, Jonas could make out Gant's angry tones, the scarred man's threatening drawl, and Kate's voice, steady and calm despite what must be her terror. "I told you, it's here somewhere. Morrison said the canyon. I need more time to search." "You've had time. You're stalling." That was Gant, frustration evident. "Either you find that gold in the next 5 minutes, or we're done playing nice." Jonas positioned himself on a small rise overlooking their position. Kate was standing near a rock face, her hands in front of her, the picture of someone searching desperately for something. But Jonas could see the set of her shoulders, the way she kept glancing toward the canyon entrance. She was still stalling, still buying time, even though she must know Jonas wasn't coming, even though she must think she was on her own. The 4 men were spread out but clustered, their attention on Kate. Poor tactical positioning, just like at the cabin. Jonas counted weapons, all 4 armed, but only Gant had his gun drawn. The others were relaxed, confident. They didn't see him as a threat. Their mistake. Jonas settled the rifle against his shoulder, sighting down the barrel. He could end this in seconds. 4 shots, 4 men down. He had the skill, had the position, but that wasn't who he was anymore. He'd done enough killing in his life. What he needed now was leverage, not bodies. "U.S. Marshal," Jonas called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Drop your weapons and put your hands up." The effect was instantaneous. The 4 men spun toward his voice, hands going to their weapons. Kate's eyes went wide, finding him on the rise above them. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Gant started laughing. U.S. Marshal, that's rich, Blackwood. There's no marshal within 50 miles of here, and we both know it. Maybe. But there's a man with a rifle pointed at you, and that's what matters right now. Jonas kept his voice steady, authoritative. Kate, step away from them. Slowly. Kate moved carefully, putting distance between herself and the 4 men. Jonas tracked her with his peripheral vision, making sure none of them tried to grab her. When she was clear, he felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. "Here's what's going to happen," Jonas said. "You're going to leave. All 4 of you. Ride out of this territory and don't come back. If I ever see you near Kate or my property again, I won't bother with talking. I'll just shoot. Understood?" The scarred man sneered. "You're 1 man with 1 gun. We're 4. I like our odds." "Then you're a fool. I'm on high ground with clear sight lines. I can drop all 4 of you before you get off 2 shots. Maybe 1 of you will get lucky and hit me, but the other 3 will still be dead. You willing to bet your life you're the lucky one?" Silence fell over the canyon. Jonas could see them calculating, weighing the odds. The scarred man was angry enough to try something stupid, but Gant was smarter. The corrupt sheriff understood self-preservation. "What about the gold?" Gant asked. "It's at my cabin. I found it. Left it there with a signed statement about where it came from. You want it, you can go back and get it. But Kate's not involved, and you're leaving her alone from now on." "How do we know you're not lying?" "You don't, but it's the best offer you're going to get." Jonas's finger rested lightly on the trigger. "Clock's ticking, Sheriff. Make your choice." Gant looked at his men, then at Kate, then up at Jonas's position. Finally, he holstered his gun. "All right, we'll go check your cabin. But if you're lying to us..." "I'm not. The gold's there. Take it back to whoever owns it, collect your reward, and stay away from Kate Morrison. That's the deal." The 4 men mounted their horses slowly, watching Jonas the whole time. As they rode past Kate toward the canyon entrance, the scarred man looked at her with naked hatred. "This isn't over, sweetheart." "Yes," Jonas called down. "It is." They rode out, disappearing around the canyon bend. Jonas waited, counting seconds, making sure they were really gone. When he was satisfied, he descended from his position and moved quickly to Kate's side. She stood where he'd left her, looking up at him with an expression that held relief and anger and something else he couldn't quite name. "You came for me." "Of course I came for you. I told you to stay safe, to let me handle this. And I ignored you. Partners don't leave partners behind." Jonas reached out, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No, just scared." Kate's composure cracked slightly. "Jonas, the letter... James hid the gold at your cabin. All this time. Under the hearth. I found it after you left." He pulled her into his arms, feeling her shake against him. "You did good, Kate, buying time like that. You saved us both. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't let them hurt you. And I couldn't let them hurt you, so I guess we're even." They stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other, 2 people who'd found something worth fighting for. Above them, the first stars began to appear, and from the canyon entrance, Dutch's voice called out, "Everything all right in there?" "We're fine, Dutch," Jonas called back. "Crisis over." "Good. I'm too old for this excitement anyway." Kate pulled back slightly, looking up at Jonas. "What happens now?" "Now we go home. The real gold is at the cabin. We'll get it to the proper authorities, clear your name officially, and then..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Then we figure out what comes next. Together." "Together," Kate repeated and smiled. "I like the sound of that." Jonas smiled back, and for the first time in 20 years, the future looked bright. Morning came with unexpected violence. Jonas woke to the sound of horses and voices. Too many of them, too close. He was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with his rifle. Dawn was just breaking, painting the mountains in shades of gray and pink, and in that pale light he counted 6 riders approaching the cabin. Not Gant and his men. These were different, harder looking, with the bearing of men used to taking what they wanted. Kate joined him at the window, her face pale. "Who are they?" "Don't know, but they're not friendly." Jonas checked his rifle, his mind racing through possibilities. "Get dressed. We may need to move fast." The riders reined in 30 yards from the cabin, spreading out in a loose semicircle. The leader, a tall man with iron-gray hair and a colonel's bearing, called out in a voice used to being obeyed. "Jonas Blackwood, we know you're in there, and we know you have our gold. Send it out with the woman, and nobody gets hurt." Jonas felt Kate stiffen beside him. "That's not Gant," she whispered. "No, these are the real owners, or the men who think they are." Jonas moved to the door, keeping his rifle ready but not raised. He stepped onto the porch, deliberately placing himself between Kate and the riders. "State your business." The gray-haired man dismounted, his movements controlled and precise. Military background, Jonas thought. Officer, probably. The kind of man who'd led men in war and expected the same obedience in peace. Colonel Marcus Sutherland, late of the Union Army, currently representing the Rocky Mountain Mining Company of Butte. You have property that belongs to us? $10,000 in gold, stolen by your accomplice, James Morrison. I'm not Morrison's accomplice. Never met the man. The gold was hidden on my property without my knowledge. So you claim. Yet somehow Morrison's widow ends up at your cabin, and somehow you find gold that's been missing for months. Quite a coincidence. Sutherland's voice dripped with skepticism. "We're not the territorial law, Blackwood. We're not bound by their niceties. That gold cost 3 men their lives. I intend to recover it, and I intend to see justice done for those deaths. The woman is innocent. She didn't know about the gold, didn't know about Morrison's crimes. I have a written statement." "Your statement means nothing. She was married to a murderer and a thief. That makes her complicit in my book." Sutherland gestured to his men. "Now, you can hand over the gold and the woman, or we can take them. Your choice." Jonas felt the familiar weight of a decision settling on his shoulders. He'd been here before, standing between violence and something worth protecting, choosing between safety and honor. 20 years ago, he'd walked away from such choices, retreated to the mountains to avoid ever having to make them again. But Kate was behind him, depending on him, and he couldn't walk away. Wouldn't walk away. "The gold's inside," Jonas said calmly. "I'll bring it out, but Kate stays with me." "That's not how this works." "It's how this works if you want the gold without bloodshed." Jonas met Sutherland's eyes steadily. "You're military. You understand tactics. I'm on high ground with cover, and you're exposed in an open clearing. You may take me eventually, but I'll drop at least 3 of you first. Maybe 4. Are you willing to lose half your men for $10,000? Sutherland studied him for a long moment, reassessing. Jonas could see the calculation happening, the recognition that he was dealing with someone who'd seen combat, who wouldn't fold under threat. Finally, the colonel nodded slowly. "Get the gold. But try anything, and we end this the hard way." Jonas went back inside, where Kate stood with her hands clenched into fists. "What are we going to do? Give them the gold? It's not worth dying for." Jonas went to the table where the gold still sat, began loading it back into the saddlebag. "But I'm not letting them take you." "Jonas, if they want me, they don't get you. That's not negotiable." He finished with the gold, hefted the bag. "When I go back out, you stay inside. No matter what happens, you stay inside and you stay down, understand?" Kate grabbed his arm. "Don't do anything stupid. Please. The gold isn't worth your life either." Jonas touched her face gently, memorizing the concern in her gray eyes. "Some things are worth fighting for. You taught me that." Then he kissed her, brief and fierce, and walked back outside. He crossed the porch and descended the steps, carrying the saddlebag. Sutherland remained mounted, watching him approach. Jonas stopped 10 feet away and tossed the bag. It landed at the colonel's horse's feet with a heavy thud. "There's your gold. Now leave." Sutherland dismounted and picked up the bag, checking the contents. Satisfied, he looked back at Jonas. "And the woman is under my protection. She's innocent of Morrison's crimes, and you have no legal authority over her. You got what you came for. Be satisfied with that. I'm not in the habit of being satisfied with half measures." Sutherland nodded to his men. "Bring her out." 2 of them dismounted, starting toward the cabin. Jonas raised his rifle, his voice hard as stone. "That would be a mistake. You can't fight all of us, Blackwood." "Maybe not, but I can make you wish you'd taken the gold and left." Jonas's finger rested on the trigger, his aim steady. "Last chance. Ride out, or we see who's still standing when the smoke clears." The 2 men stopped, looking to their colonel for direction. And in that moment of hesitation, a new voice cut through the tension. "I'd suggest you listen to him, Sutherland." Everyone turned. Dutch Kiefer sat on his horse at the tree line, his rifle across his saddle, looking relaxed but ready. And beside him sat 3 other men. Mountain men like Dutch, hard-faced and capable, their weapons visible. "Dutch," Jonas said, surprised. "Figured you might need backup. Called in some favors." Dutch smiled without humor. "Now then, Colonel, you got your gold. Time to head home before this gets ugly for everyone." Sutherland looked at the reinforcements, then at Jonas, then at the cabin where Kate waited. Finally, he remounted, his face tight with frustration. "This isn't over." "Yes," Jonas said firmly, "it is." The 6 riders turned and left, disappearing down the trail with their recovered gold. Jonas watched until they were out of sight, then lowered his rifle and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Kate emerged from the cabin, running to him. He caught her, held her tight, feeling her shake with reaction. "It's over," he said into her hair. "Really over this time." "How can you be sure?" "Because they got what they came for, and because Dutch is here with witnesses. Any further action against you would be public, messy, and ultimately pointless." Jonas pulled back to look at her. "You're free, Kate. Truly free. No more threats, no more danger." Kate looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling. "Then what do we do now?" Jonas glanced at Dutch and his friends, who were beginning to approach the cabin. "Now we thank our friends, and then we start living the life we fought for." Spring came to the mountains the way it always did. Slowly at first, then all at once. Snow melted from the lower slopes, revealing earth dark and fertile. Ice broke up in the streams, sending crystal water rushing down toward the valleys. Green pushed through brown, aspens budded, and the air filled with the sound of birds returning from their southern journeys. Jonas stood on his porch in the early morning, a clay mug warm in his hands, watching the world wake up. Behind him, he heard the cabin door open and close softly. Kate joined him, carrying her own mug, a twin to his, both shaped by his hands on the wheel he'd set up in his workshop over the winter. She'd wanted to learn pottery, and he'd taught her, the same way he'd taught her to carve and track and read the weather in the clouds. "Morning," she said, leaning against him comfortably. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in 20 years. Jonas put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You?" "Same." She sipped her coffee, looking out at the view he'd looked at alone for so long. "I'll never get tired of this. The mountains at sunrise." They stood in companionable silence, watching light paint the peaks in shades of gold and amber. It had been 5 months since the confrontation with Sutherland, 5 months of peace and building and learning, to be more than solitary survivors. Kate's name had been officially cleared after a territorial marshal investigated and found Gant's corruption went deeper than anyone had suspected. The sheriff was in prison now, along with his associates. The wanted poster had been withdrawn, replaced with a formal apology from the territorial government. Kate was free. Truly, legally, permanently free. "I need to ride down to Bitter Creek today," Jonas said. "Trade some furs, pick up supplies. Want to come along?" "I do. I've been meaning to visit Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house. She wrote me a letter last month apologizing for the town's treatment of me. Said she'd always thought it was wrong but hadn't spoken up. I'd like to tell her it's all right, that I understand." Jonas smiled at that. Kate's capacity for forgiveness was larger than his, always had been. "That's kind of you. It's necessary. Holding on to anger just weighs you down. I'd rather travel light." She glanced at him, a teasing light in her gray eyes. "Besides, I want to show them the ring." Jonas looked down at her left hand, at the simple gold band he'd fashioned from a nugget he'd panned from his stream. He'd proposed on a cold February evening, not with grand gestures, but with simple truth. He loved her, wanted to build a life with her, hoped she felt the same. She'd said yes before he'd finished asking, and they'd been married by Dutch, who turned out to be ordained as a minister despite years of living like a hermit. "Think they'll be surprised?" Jonas asked. "Shocked is more like it. Mountain Man marries the woman he rescued from the fence. It's practically a fairy tale." Kate set down her mug and turned to face him fully. "Though I prefer to think you didn't rescue me. You gave me the tools to rescue myself." "That's a better story," Jonas agreed. Movement caught his eye. 2 riders approaching from the south trail. Jonas tensed automatically, but Kate touched his arm. "It's all right. That's the Kiefer boys. Dutch sent word they'd be stopping by." She was right. Dutch's 2 sons, both young men who'd chosen to live in town rather than follow their father's solitary path, reined in at the edge of the clearing. Jonas relaxed and waved them up. "Morning, Mr. Blackwood. Mrs. Blackwood," the older one, Jacob, called out. "Pa sent us with a message. There's a town meeting next week in Deer Lodge. They're talking about forming a proper county government, want input from folks in the territory." "Why would they want our input?" Kate asked. "Because you 2 are famous now," the younger son, Samuel, said with a grin. "The mountain man who stood up to corruption and the woman who survived it. People respect that. They want to know what you think about law and order, about how to keep things fair." Jonas and Kate exchanged glances. "Tell them we'll think about it," Jonas said. "Can't promise we'll attend, but we'll consider it." After the Kiefer boys left, Kate turned to Jonas with raised eyebrows. "Famous? Really?" "Apparently, though I can't say I'm comfortable with it." "Neither am I, but maybe it's not about comfort. Maybe it's about using what happened to us to help other people, to make sure no one else gets sold on a fence or falsely accused or pushed around by men with badges and no conscience." Jonas considered this, then nodded slowly. "You're right. We went through something for a reason. Might as well make it mean something." They spent the day working together, tending the garden they'd planted, repairing winter damage to the fences, organizing supplies. It was simple work, satisfying work, the kind that left them tired but content at the end of the day. That evening they sat on the porch as they had that first morning, watching the sunset and the stars emerge. "Do you ever miss it?" Kate asked. "The solitude, I mean. The life you had before." Jonas thought about it honestly. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it. No complications, no worries about anyone but myself. But I don't miss the emptiness, that hollow feeling of surviving but not living." He pulled her closer. "You filled that emptiness, Kate. Made me remember what it feels like to be whole. You did the same for me. When I was sitting on that fence in Bitter Creek, I'd given up, accepted that my life was over, that I'd be property until I died. Then you rode up and changed everything. She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the twilight. You gave me back my life, and then you gave me a home. We gave each other home, Jonas corrected. That's what this is. Not mine or yours, but ours. They sat together as full darkness fell. Two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd fought for their freedom and won, who'd built something real and lasting from the ashes of their separate pasts. Around them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to their story, the way they'd witnessed countless others over the centuries. But this story, Jonas thought, was different. This story had a happy ending, not a perfect one. Life never offered perfection, but a real one, a true one. The kind that comes from two damaged people choosing to heal together, to build together, to face whatever comes together. Kate rested her head on his shoulder, and Jonas felt a peace deeper than any he'd known in his 20 years of solitude. This was what he'd been searching for without knowing it. Not escape from life, but engagement with it. Not isolation, but connection. Not surviving, but living. Jonas? Kate's voice was soft, almost tentative. Yes? I'm happy, really truly happy, for the first time in longer than I can remember. Jonas kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her against him. Me too, Kate. Me too. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, and from somewhere in the forest, a wolf called to the moon. The mountains settled into night, and in their small cabin, Jonas and Kate Blackwood settled into their life together, a life built on freedom, dignity, and love. The kind of life worth fighting for. The kind of life worth living. The end of one story and the beginning of another, as it should be.